key efforts was to find out where battles were and have this medical supplies there at the battle site as the battle ended.
Union women were expected to sacrifice in the name of patriotism. The First Lady, Mary Todd Lincoln, a former Kentucky belle, was criticized for her alleged Confederate sympathies as well as her wartime extravagance.
Even as troops were fighting and dying, she insisted upon redecorating and having the proper number of clothes befitting a president's wife. This was very distressing to a lot of people who wanted to view her as a role model, and she did not behave as such.
The Civil War happened at a time when, certainly compared to today, there was very strict ideas as far as what was proper for men to do and what was proper for women to do. And I think in that sense, the Civil War shakes that up tremendously.
The women left without the menfolk had to do all the work themselves. There are numerous accounts of women hitching themselves to the plows. Many of them went into government work as clerks, stenographers, which was somewhat of a breakthrough. Large numbers of them worked in arsenals, hand-packing bullets and doing dangerous work of that sort.
In June of 1864, there was a terrible explosion at the Washington Arsenal, and 23 women were killed. The next day, at their mass burial in Congressional Cemetery, President Lincoln was on hand to honor these women. Their work was not glamorous by any means, but it was dangerous work and it was important work.
As the war intensified and casualties mounted, women found themselves entering a new profession, once only held by men.
No lady ever went into a hospital and subjected herself to the sights, the sounds, the stench that marked such buildings. Yet as the war continued, male nurses simply couldn't handle the load. And so on both sides, the call went out for women volunteers. And some of the most magnanimous stories we have in all of Civil War history of and by these women who stepped forward and became nurses.
The foul air from this mass of human being at first made me giddy and sick. We have to walk in blood and water, but we think nothing of it. Kate Cumming, Confederate nurse, 1862. There was one story that a woman tells of the maggots had already grown into the wound. Then she had to scoop the worms out of the wound, and she said she pulled a full pint of worms out of this particular wound.
Legless, armless occupants entering my ward admonished me that I was there to work, not to wonder or weep. Louisa May Alcott, Union nurse, 1862.
Of all Union nurses, none gained more respect than Mary Ann Bickerdike.
She got this nickname of Mother Bickerdike, I think in large part because so many of the soldiers on the battlefield were looking for a maternal figure, and she sort of filled that void. After the Battle of Fort Donelson, where she sort of appeared on the battlefield at midnight looking for the wounded soldiers, and this story got picked up by newspapers as this sort of miraculous relief worker who came to the soldiers in their hour of need.
My God, man, Mother Bickerdike outranks everyone, even Lincoln. General Ulysses S. Grant, 1862.
Very few nurses actually went out onto the battlefield under fire. One of the exceptions, of course, was Clara Barton, who at the Battle of Antietam indeed came under fire, and a soldier whom she was treating at the time was actually killed as she worked on him.
I did not wait for reporters and journalists to tell us that a battle had been fought. I went in while the battle raged. Clara Barton, 1862.
Of course, there were next to no female surgeons. Mary Walker was one of the only women in America at that time who actually had a medical degree. Mary Walker was really a character. She was as strong-willed and independent-minded a woman as you would ever meet in mid-19th century America. she would wear a short skirt over trousers, just like the men wore. She cropped her hair short, and she managed to wrangle an appointment as an assistant surgeon.
She's often remembered for her dress rather than her very notable accomplishments of being the first woman surgeon in the Union Army. She had to overcome severe prejudice against women in medicine, against women trying to serve their country.
Dr. Walker proved her skills under fire at the battles of Fredericksburg and Gettysburg. In 1865, she was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor, the only woman to receive such esteem. However, the medal was later taken away from her by an act of Congress.
Years later, that was taken away from her, and whether because of some chauvinistic bias or because she had taken to wearing the Medal of Honor as on a stage show, it's a very tragic story. Despite her eccentricities, she, I think, cut a path that many other women would follow in the decades to come.
I do look rough, my dear beauty, too rough to be your mate. I would, were it not for honor and country, leave it tomorrow. Henry Seller, Confederate soldier, 1865.
More than one time today I have stolen to our room alone and been as near to you as possible. All day tears would unbide and start, and now I cannot see to write. Sally Seller, February 18th, 1865.
As the nation dug deeper into war, women endured longer separations from their loved ones who marched off to battle. As a result, thousands of women flocked to the military camps, some to work, others to bolster morale.
Women represented civilization, or the civilizing influences. And you read so often in the soldiers' letters and diaries that when a woman visited camp, it was more of a sense of the woman symbolizing their own family, their own mothers, their own sisters.
There were some officers who opposed this, feeling that it destroyed military discipline and was bad for the troops as far as keeping them in order. And there were other officers who felt that it was good for the morale of the troops, and what was good for the morale of the troops was good for the troops.
Quite an excitement has been raised among the boys. There was a woman in the camp with hoops on. You must know we've not seen but one woman here for 6 weeks or more. David Beam, Indiana soldier, 1861.
Most women who stayed at the Union camps were cooks and laundresses, and many escaped slaves were hired for these positions.
Susie King Taylor was perhaps the most well-known of the group because she could read and write. She spent most of the war in the South Carolina Sea Islands, and she married one of the soldiers. She served as well as a cook and as a nurse and as a teacher to the troops.
I learned to handle a musket very well while I was in the regiment and could shoot straight and often hit the target. Susie King Taylor, 1862.
A few women followed their husbands off to war, such as Katie Brownell, who was made an unofficial mascot of the 1st Rhode Island Regiment. But there were others who sought after more profitable occupations.
Many women deserted by male supporters had to find new opportunities to support themselves. When you had literally thousands of women turned off the land, no way to support their children, and many of them did turn to prostitution in large numbers.
There were prostitutes trying to sneak into camp, and in fact, there were some prostitutes who managed to find their way to the front. One of these was a young teenager woman named Anna Jones. Anna Jones was an orphan, and she essentially became what we would call today a military groupie. She was a companion to General Judson Kilpatrick, a daredevil cavalryman, and another young West Pointer named George Armstrong Custer.
When I joined General Kilpatrick's command and went to the front as the friend and companion of General Custer, General Kilpatrick became very jealous of General Custer's attentions to me. Anna Jones, 1862.
Of all the female adventurers who went to war, none were more respected among the troops than the vivandières.
A number of American regiments copied the French by having in their ranks a vivandière, and a vivandière carried food, sometimes a little keg of liquor. Their job was to basically bolster the soldiers' morale.
She was wonderfully courageous, or else she didn't understand the danger. The shower of musket balls and every sort of projectile falling in the midst of us. Officer, 8th Ohio Infantry, 1864.
Perhaps the most famous of the American vivandières was in fact a French-born woman named Marie Tepe, known throughout the Army of the Potomac as French Mary. She was married to a soldier in the regiment. Her life is shrouded in mystery. What is not in doubt is her bravery under fire. Wherever the 114th Pennsylvania went, be it on the march or in the battle, French Mary was there. She was wounded, shot in the heel at the Battle of Fredericksburg. And she was decorated with a Carney Cross, one of the few medals for valor that existed at that time.
40 years after the war and crippled by the pain from her war wound, Mary Tepe committed suicide. Many said she had become yet another casualty of war. The pain the Civil War caused was both physical and emotional. And for women, they not only witnessed and treated the sick, wounded, and dying, they also experienced it themselves.
Hundreds of women marched steadily up to the mouth of 100 cannon. Through all this, women were sustained by the enthusiasm born of love of country and liberty. Susan B. Anthony.
Not all soldiers who marched into the line of fire were men. Untold numbers of women, North and South, disguised their gender to fight in a war that only wanted men.
The women who went off to be soldiers went for as many reasons as men did off to be soldiers. Some women went to accompany sweethearts. Some women who were not interested in marriage and families and traditional women's roles sought the life of independence and freedom that a soldier's life would afford them.
It seems almost unbelievable to us today that a woman could successfully pass herself off as a man and not be discovered. In fact, the sight of a woman in mid-19th century America with short hair wearing men's clothing would have been so odd and so utterly beyond the ken of the typical male that I think that played into the strategy of these women. The thing is, 19th century people tended to be much more modest than we are today. Privacy was a little more possible then.
We only have a handful of women who left their memoirs behind for us. Usually women were discovered when they were wounded or hospitalized, but it was amazing how many women were able to not only serve prominently, but we have examples of women who not only served bravely and valiantly, but we have no fewer than 6 women who delivered babies.
There was an